Hello and happy Friday. Alex Cox here again for another Fridays Live. And as usual, we will give it just a few moments for more people to join. So I will make sure I have everything closed, nothing popping up and distracting me. And I will patiently wait for more of you to join. Oh, I can see we've got a few people watching already. Hello, hello. Yeah, I'll just wait for that number to climb a little bit more before we get started. And I'll just grab my water. Hello, Anya, how are you? Happy Friday. I mean, it's quite surreal saying Friday because I seem to have lost all track of time. I'm constantly having to check the calendar to remind myself what day it actually is today. While it is very nice, it's Friday. The weekdays and the weekends do seem to be melting into one. Hi, William. How are you? Hello, Patricia. Great. Well, I can see the numbers climbing. I'll give it another minute or so because I've got quite a lot of exciting things to talk about today. Obviously, maybe we'll see how we get on for time. Because we do genuinely have quite a lot of cool stuff to discuss today. It's Friday, which means we've added more new records to the site, but today is a particularly vast release. It's actually the biggest release we have added to the site so far this year. Over 116 million records, which are forming the second phase of a exclusive collection that we have that we published in partnership with the British Library. It's a vast resource, one that probably doesn't get as much use as it should. Those are electoral registers. The full title would be Electoral Registers 1832 to 1932. And as we've added so many of them today, fresh, hot off the press, I think it's over 2.2 miles of shelving that they're stored on at the British Library. I thought today's subject would be all about electoral registers, why they're so amazing, if you haven't used them already, why you should be using them, what they can reveal, the various uses they have, but also why this collection I think is so interesting. If you look at the date range, 1832 to 1932, this collection really does capture the birth of the British electorate, and that's not me being dramatic. It really does. 1832 is a date that probably most of you, if you're watching the UK and you went through the English school system, you should know what 1832 signifies. It was a big part of my GCSE history course. That is the Great Reform Act of 1832. And when I was 15, I thought it was the most boring thing ever. But now I've matured a little bit. I actually think it's very interesting, and I'm going to try and convey that to you guys as well, because these records really do capture the various points throughout British history when the electorate was expanded, when more people were given the right to vote. So these records are not only a great resource for your family history, they're also a great resource for looking at the history of British democracy, which is pretty cool. So yeah, loads to talk about. So all about electoral rolls if you're just tuning in. Massive new update to our collection today. 116 million new records, which brings the total of the collection to about 6.7, covering virtually the entirety of England and Wales. But of course, we do have loads of other electoral register collections on the site, covering various parts of Ireland, Australia. I think we might have some for New Zealand. We've got some for Scotland as well. But yeah, all things electoral roll, why they're amazing, and if we do all right for time as well, we'll have a look at some of the other wonderful collections from the British Library that you may not even realise are online. Sales pitch out of the way. We do have an exclusive partnership with the British Library. The main result of that is something that you're probably all familiar with. That is our wonderful newspaper collection and the British Newspaper Archive. But yeah, this is another enormous resource that people don't seem to start using until they get a little bit further on in their research, until they've kind of moved out of the beginner group and more into the experienced researcher. But they can be of huge benefit quite early on in your research as well. So we will look at all of that. Um, and also, if you are just tuning in, we tend to ask a question of the week at the start of each video, just to get the comments rolling. Because one of the great things about these videos, particularly during this period of self-isolation, is that it enables us all to stay in touch, talk to each other. I mean, I can see everybody saying hi to each other in the comments, all the familiar faces that I look forward to seeing the comments every single week, and also some new ones, which is very nice to see. But yeah, our question of the week is, have you made any new discoveries while you've been stuck at home? You might not have even had time to research. Quite a few people I've spoken to have said they seem to be busier now than when they had the ability to freely roam the streets. Yeah, so if you have made any great family history leaps and bounds, if you found anything new, tell us all about it. Or likewise, if you've got any novel tips for staying busy, doesn't have to be family history related, let us know. As I said, this isn't just about me waffling on about all the great things Found My Past are doing. It's also an opportunity for us to all just stay in touch, talk to each other, and help each other cope. It's been a lot. It's been quite a while now, hasn't it? I mean, it's only been nearly 2 weeks, but to me, it feels like it's been going on for weeks. And as you can see, I'm already starting to look a bit wilder and hairier. I think that might be the castaway effect. Probably start talking to a volleyball soon at this rate. But anyway, let's have a look at the comments. Hello, Kim. Lovely to see you again. Hello, Chrissy. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Nicola. Ellie, thank you for joining. Hello, Eric. Hello, Denise. Happy Friday. I know it makes it worse that it's so beautiful outside. Hello, Linda. I'm not doing too bad, William. Not doing too bad. As I said, I'm getting a little bit fed up and bored. But making the best of it, as I think we all are trying to do. Hello, Jackie. Hello, Karen from Harrogate, beautiful part of the world. Hello, Maureen in Bonnie, Scotland. Well, it's a bonny day today. On you up in Fife. Amanda, Julie, Joe, Ali, so much stuff. But on you saying question of the week, afraid about a lot of other things. Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? People seem to be filling their time quite effectively, but have decided to do work on Partners Italian, Irish, Scottish Tree, and waiting for Miko's Italian special broadcast. Yeah, that won't be one to miss. Actually, another thing I just want to remind everybody as well is, apart from these videos I do on a Friday, we are hosting live events every single Tuesday and every single Thursday at 4 p.m. here on our Facebook page. If you want to keep up to date with exactly what we've got planned, who we've got on, and the different topics we'll be doing, just follow us. This is where we share all the information, and you've got some fantastically knowledgeable people coming up. I mean, Miko's talks are always incredible. Ellie did a fantastic job yesterday, telling us all about answering everybody's questions about the 1939 Register, another fantastic resource. And I believe we've got ones coming up with Paul Nixon, who's our military expert. I mean, what that guy doesn't know about World War One records and British military history in general isn't really worth knowing. And also the fantastically entertaining and incredibly knowledgeable Brian Donovan, who heads up most of our licensing efforts in Ireland. And by licensing efforts, I mean he's the guy who brings in all these wonderful Irish records and helps us get them up on the site. Hi, Margaret. Well, I hope I'm able to give you some useful tips on using electoral rolls. Hello, Nicole. That is, yeah, Nicole's saying one of the downsides when you're looking for relatives is you never know how the person is related if they live in the same address. I think that's just, yeah, that isn't given, but they do, cross-referencing with other resources is an excellent way of doing it. And if you find your ancestors in the electoral registers, you've already got an address, which should help you pin down a census return. Hi, Kevin in Poole. No, I bet it's lovely in Poole this time on a day like today. Shame you probably can't get outside. Denise, finally found my first relative in the newspaper. Out of our new edition from the Crew Chronicle. Well, I'm over the moon about that. If it was, were they doing something naughty? If you feel comfortable sharing that story, I would like to hear it. Hello to Anne-Marie in Glasgow. Richard Jones, when will electoral registers for Wales be released? Well, some are released for today. Our collection is England and Wales. But anyway, I'm going to dive into that in a second. Janet, hello from a newbie. Well, you're very welcome, Janet, and thank you for tuning in. And Sylvia's saying, bright but chilly day up in Yorkshire. Oh, and I'm glad you had your tablet, Cindy, because I'm very grateful to everyone's here. But anyway, right, electoral rolls. What are we talking about today? Well, the wonderful resources that are electoral rolls. You may have already seen on our blog, and if you received the Found My Past Friday emails, you will have got this exciting news already, but probably not in the amount of detail that I'm going to go into right now. But yeah, our big news for today is that we're thrilled to announce we've added, I've said it many times before already in this video, but we've added over 116 million new records to our collection of England and Wales electoral registers 1832 to 1932. This is easily the single largest release we've done this year. I know we're not that far into 2020, but it's gonna be up the list of the largest ones we do throughout the year, because 160 million records is a lot, and digitizing those and bringing them online is no mean feat. Um, but yeah, these are completely exclusive to us, a result of our partnership with the British Library, and this forms the second phase of an absolutely mammoth digitisation project, which we've been doing with the library to digitise 100 years of microfilmed copies of the British Library's unique collection of printed registers. And this collection's big, very, very big. One of the amazing things about electoral rolls is, unlike censuses, they weren't just taken every 10 years, they were actually taken annually. And later on, they were taken biannually. So that should give you a rough idea of how big the physical collection actually is. But if you need a clearer idea, um, it's actually, as I said, it's housed on 3.62 linear kilometers of shelving. That's just over 2 miles. So that's a lot of paper. And yeah, this is the first batch was released back in 2015. And we've been adding smaller updates to it over time. But this is really phase two. This is the next big batch we've done since we first launched them in 2002. But the reason we think this is quite exciting is because, yeah, this is the very first time this second batch has been published online. The same went for the first batch back in 2015, which means for the first time you can search them and access them online. I mean, prior to this, the only way of actually getting any use of these would have been accessing the original printed volumes or the microfilms, which could only be accessed at the British Library's reading rooms. There's one at the library at King's Cross, St Pancras, and there's also one up in Boston Spa. But now 6.7 million, which is how many we currently have up on the site, can be explored regardless of where you are, any time of day, 24 hours a day. And also, it doesn't the fact that you can search by name, date, constituency, place, or keyword, basically means that you don't need to be an experienced researcher, you don't need to be an academic, no level of expertise is required to actually dig into these records and find what you're looking for. Because previously, before these search functions were added in, when the records were brought online, the only way you'd be able to track someone down would be already knowing the address. And given that one of the best things about electoral registers is that they give you an address, that's kind of counterintuitive. If you don't know the address, you can have a very hard time finding your ancestors. But the address is normally the thing you're looking for when you're searching these registers. Yeah, so this is a problem we have solved. Just seeing a comment. Rita's saying video keeps stopping. I hope that's not the true for everybody. Um, yeah, as Linda said, very good fill before the 21 census is out. Obviously, which is still being digitized. A few people. Yeah, Trish Kelly said we've also got a very good collection of Australian electoral rolls, which is something I will also touch on later on. This is definitely our biggest core collection of electoral registers, but it's not the only ones we have. And Kim saying, found my great grandfather's son on a ledger register before I found his birth, half brother to my granddad. See, they're helping people already. A few people saying there was problems with the stream. Do flag that if there's any more problems, and we will see what's going on. Patty Marie in St. Louis. Hello. Oh wow, I wonder what time it is over there. Yeah, keep an eye out for Miko's. Ellie should be able to share details with you in the comments. And Elsa of Society of Genealogists fame has said, as rural electoral reforms improved after 1884, my agricultural labourers were shown in Herefordshire electoral rolls, great for identifying a more precise address and cottage name than census. Totally true. And that is why they're so fantastic. But yeah, back to the British Library's collection. They hold so many. This 1832 to 1932 run is not all they hold. Approximately 800 volumes are still being added to the collection each year. because of course electoral registers are still documents that we use today. But what are they? You may be sitting there going, oh, what is an electoral register? Well, electoral registers were introduced in 1832 along with the Great Reform Act. Um, and that was because the Great Reform Act dramatically increased the number of voters, and polling days were reduced to 1 day. That meant that there was arguably for the first time a serious need to establish people's right to vote before they actually turned up on polling day. So that is why electoral registers were created. Just having a quick drink. And in the collection that we've added to today, you've got really four main types of register. You've got parliamentary registers, which are purely lists of people entitled to vote in parliamentary elections. You've also got Burgess rolls, which are lists of people who are entitled to vote in their local government elections. And you've also got parochial registers, which are lists of people who are entitled to vote in their local parish elections, as well as county council registers, which are people who could vote in county council elections, but they only run from 1889 to 1915. So there you go. You've got four types of voters and entitlements in there, which should give you another idea of the frequency at which these records were taken. So quite regularly. But what can they tell you? A lot. A lot. As I said at the start of the video, they weren't just taken every 10 years, they were taken annually and later on biannually, which means they are really the best tool at your disposal for tracking ancestors between census years. And that's something that I know a lot of people are quite keen to do. I mean, my ancestors, a lot of them seemed actually, I think only one set of ancestors were in the same address in pretty much every census. Pretty much all of my other family units within my family tree seem to jump from address to address every 10 years, and are therefore somewhere completely different in each census, which does leave you to scratch your head and think, where were they? Where were they in between? Where were they going? Why were they there? And electoral registers or electoral rolls, whatever you want to call them, are your main tool for working that out. But it's not just address. You will also find their reason for eligibility, which until 1918 was tied very, very closely to property ownership. Um, so you might find things like their residence being listed, if they owned a property, or they had a tenant, or they were a tenant, or in some cases even a lodger. That's information that you might find in there. And of course, qualifications for voting rights changed over time, which means that the format of these documents and what you'll find will vary depending on what era of it. I say British history, probably in this set English and Welsh history, but we have collections for other parts of the UK as well. But generally, you will find the same 4 or 5 pieces of information in every image you view. And as images are available, I would recommend viewing them. If you have the option to view an image, always look at it, because that is where the richness. That's where you're going to find all the real information. But anyway, what will you mainly find? You will find the person's name, which is helpful for finding them. You will find their address or abode. You will find a description of the nature of their qualification, which might even actually include a description of the property itself. You will find the name, description, and residence of the landlord, or any person to whom their rent is paid if they don't actually own the property they're sat in. And occasionally, but not in all cases, you might find their occupation and age. So yeah, so in some cases you can actually find out quite a lot. Just keeping another eye on comments to make sure my video is still, yeah, you can still see me. That's very good. But yeah, so as I said, the format of each register does vary, and not just on date actually, but also on constituency. Normal arrangement, though, the arrangement you will most typically come across is in address order. So that's to say that within the register for each individual polling district, streets are listed in alphabetical order, and properties within them are listed in sequence. But that's not always the same as numerical order. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind. Kind of similar to the comment Elsa left before, remote rural areas were not susceptible to a street arrangement because you can't really do it in a small hamlet where there might be 3 or 4 houses or 5 or 6 farms. Um, and in those cases, voters would just normally be listed in alphabetical order of surname. Um, so, and that would be limited to quite small units of administration, if that makes sense. So on the parish level, usually, or townland level, it wouldn't go much bigger than that. Um, and electors are listed by surname followed by their first name. So if that, just to recap, if that makes sense, if in most constituencies or polling districts, urban ones, the lists are ordered by address in alphabetical order. In smaller rural ones where that wasn't possible, it's listed by surname followed by first name. So that's kind of what we're going to see. And the richest period, probably the richest information that for researchers are found in the registers that were taken between around 1885 up to the First World War. They're also actually the most complex. Because they have several different sequences representing the different franchises for the same polling area, so it can be quite tricky to get your head around it at first. But there are actually some really good guides up on the British Library's website, and if we have time, I'll mention some of those as we get on. Voters who are listed as a resident with a business franchise, so that was another, at various points in time, that was another reason for you being allowed to vote. If you owned a business, they'd have their business address also listed. So that's another extra bit of information you can find out. Those who had a lodger's franchise would actually have their weekly rent in there. So you could compare how much rent your ancestor was paying to, if you're a renter, how much rent you're paying today, which I'm sure is bound to make you sick to your stomach, even if you factor in inflation. And you might even also find the number of rooms they rented, and as I said before, the name of their landlord, or more usually landlady. So yeah, you're surprisingly rich. You might think at first glance, if you knew what an electoral register was, you might think, oh, I'm not going to find out that much in there. But surprise, surprise, you can. So as well as images, when you're searching these, you will also see a transcription box. Transcription boxes are the little boxes on the left-hand side of the screen, which just boil down the essential information that our artificial intelligence or system is used to find the record you've searched for. And they pretty much have the same thing every time. It will be constituency, year. Just to note as well, registers are dated using the year they were compiled, not the year they were actually in force, which is the British Library's practice. So to give you an example of that, if you look at a register for the township of Everton in the parliamentary borough of Liverpool, you can tell why I looked that one up. It actually states, so we've got a quote from them here. It says, persons entitled to vote at any election of a member or members to serve in Parliament, which will take place in and for the borough of Liverpool between the last day of November 1852 basically, and the first day of December 1853. But in this example, we have the recorded year as 1852. So I hope that makes sense. I probably didn't do a very good job of explaining that. That was my attempt, but it is quite complicated. Denise, yeah. Once we're finished, I've just seen Denise said, can you put up a brief summary later with different lists parochially? ETC didn't manage to write it all down. Yeah, I'll pop that in the comments as soon as I hop off live. And I will. There's also some really useful guides about guides to polling districts and constituencies, which are very helpful. And I will pop those in the comments as well. So if you're after those bits, stick around till the end, and they will be there. So yeah, you'll have back to the transcription of constituency, year, polling district or place. This also includes polling districts or wards. If you're looking for a civil parish, those aren't actually indexed, so you need to search those by keyword. County, country, England or Wales. Archive and British Library set shelf marks. If you ever were planning on going to one of the reading rooms at Boston Spa or King's Cross, which if you're ever in the area of either location, I would thoroughly recommend doing so. I always love a trip to the British Library. And an image number as well. But very quick note on searching. So these records, because they're so big, because there's so many of them, there's 6.7 million of them, and when you look at an image, these lists are just packed with information, column after column after column after column. It's not like a census return where it's laid out quite clearly, and particularly with the 1911 census, it's quite easy to digest when you're looking at each individual image. because this is so vast, in a similar way to our newspaper collection, we weren't able to index every single one. So that means you search these in the same way that you'd search a newspaper, and that is OCR, or optical character recognition. And the way OCR works is it basically takes a photo of an image and it uses machine learning, artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, to automatically recognize characters and phrases within that image. So it's not as accurate as an indexed search, but it allows us to process millions and millions more records at a much, much, much faster rate. But if you're used to searching newspapers, you'll also know that it's not without its quirks. So if you're so like one of the things is, say you're looking for a guy called John Smith on one page, you may actually get instances of a John Williams living on Smith Street, or a Henry Smith living on St John's Close or something like that. It'll pick out pretty much every keyword you popped on one page. So just things to bear in mind. But OCR is still great because it gives us newspapers, and without it, we wouldn't be able to make something as big as this searchable. Um, let's have a quick look at some comments. Yeah, I think quite a few people are struggling with internet connections. I can see a few people are saying that the stream's popping in and out, but I don't think that is Facebook, or as I think that just could be that everybody's on the internet at the moment. Hi, Angela. Very nice to see you. Um, oh, wow. Danny Taylor Starr. Great. Wow. Yeah, very great to see you indeed. Hi. I believe we've met at Roots Tech. I'm just saying, in the Australian ones, when I've used them, I've looked to see if I can find names of children living with their parents if I didn't have them already. Oh, great to see Linda's been penciling in future talks. Yeah, if you've got any questions about what's coming up, just ask Ellie in the comments and she'll be more than happy to fill you in. Yeah, the British Library is brilliant. Alison Hatton, are there electoral rolls for canal boatmen? Well, it depends when the canal boatmen will have entered the British electorate, when they would have been given the right to vote. This big core collection of registers isn't split out by occupation or anything like that. It's literally, if a person was entitled to vote and registered, they'll be in there. But anyway, yeah, back to the collection. So why are they so great? Well, as I've said before, as well as finding exact locations between census years, they're also probably one of the best tools in your arsenal for house history, or local, uncovering the history of your local area. I mean, I'm sure many of you watching in the UK are quite keen on the brilliant TV series A House Through Time. I think that brought house history research to the masses. I think there was a huge uptick in interest in that, and it's something that I've really enjoyed doing myself. Like my parents, I mean, I couldn't research the flat I'm sat in now because I think it was built in like the 50s or something, so wouldn't be that much out there. But my parents' house, which was built in the 1890s, I found loads of cool stuff out about their street. I even found a poisoning case. But anyway, these electoral registers are great for finding out who lived in your house. So, if you've ever done a bit of decorating, if you're lucky enough to live in a lovely Victorian house, which is my dream one day, and you've peeled back the wallpaper to find something beautifully vintage, and you've wondered who put that up. These are the ways of doing it. You can find who lived there. You may even find who owned it. Um, you can find how you can get a bit of a view of how the area around your house developed over the years. With new homes, you can see new businesses being built, and in some cases, you can, if a birth year actually isn't listed, you can use registers to estimate your ancestor's year of birth. This is from 1918. So from the 19, I'm not explaining this very well. It is quite a complicated topic, so I'll try my best. From the 1918 Full Reform Act, your ancestor basically would have first appeared in the register after they reached voting age. And the voting age for men was 21, and for women it was 30 until 1928, when it was lowered to 21. So therefore, after 1918, birth can be estimated by taking away the voting age from the first year your ancestor appears in the register. So just to repeat that, if it makes sense. So after 1918, your ancestor's birth year can be estimated by taking away the voting age from the first year your ancestor appears in the register. Um, Also, your ancestor would have ceased to have been registered after their death. So if they suddenly vanish and you haven't already found evidence of death, that is quite a good indication that they may have shuffled off this mortal coil. Actually, do you know what I'll quickly do as well? This might be helpful as well. I'll do a very quick breakdown of the different kinds of information you will find in the different eras. So from 1832 to 1948, you will find the well, that's even beyond what we cover. So all electoral registers, every single record in this collection will give the nature of the qualification to vote. From 1885 to 1915, you will find the landlord's or landlady's name. You will also find, as I mentioned before, the weekly rent they paid, the number of rooms they rented. And this was when the lodgers franchise came into effect in 1885. From 1869 to 1928, you will find the names of female ratepayers, and this was a real rarity until the Married Women's Property Law came into effect. And basically, these early female ratepayers had the municipal vote, and they increasingly appear over time until they finally received the parliamentary vote in 1918 and then fully in 1928. But another thing I want to talk about in this is a timeline of who could vote and when, because it just really sums up how interesting this collection is as a whole when you think about the history of British democracy and how rapidly the electorate expanded and all these different key points in our history. So from 1878 onwards, you will find people entitled to vote in municipal but not parliamentary elections. And nowadays this will include voting for peers of the realm, things like that. And a few years from 1918, you will also find lists of absent voters who are currently on active duty serving in the armed forces. So that only starts in 1918. So in 1918, they will have actually been on active service fighting. After that, they may have been part of the occupation armies who are staying behind in France, Palestine, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that's kind of like a breakdown of what you will get to see and when. But actually, another thing I should say quickly as well is while this collection is huge, we're not finished yet. There is still more to come. It's a very extensive collection, but it's not totally complete, and there are some gaps. So holdings are a lot better from, when I say holdings, the volume of records in there, the completeness, the comprehensiveness of this collection is a lot better from 1918 to 1932 than it is from 1885 up to 1915. So yeah, just bear that in mind. And another thing to just complicate matters is constituency boundaries do not stay the same. It's one of those annoying quirks about history research. You think, why couldn't they just not make it easy for us? They didn't. Constituency boundaries have changed quite dramatically over the years. Borders of certain polling areas have shifted, in some cases, many miles. And for these reasons, I think if you're serious about delving into the electoral registers, if you're not just looking for one or two ancestors, if you're really looking at having a deep look, I'd reckon it's probably worth doing a little bit of research into historic constituencies before you get started, really. So just to give you an example of that, between 1885 and 1918, Tottenham was a division of the parliamentary county of Middlesex, but it isn't anymore. And if you do want to get a better idea of this, if you've got your pens and papers at the ready, the British Library do a very good guide. I don't have a link to hand, but it's called British Library's Parliamentary Constituencies and Their Registers Since 1832. It doesn't trip off the tongue, and it's not the jazziest name in the world, but it's a very, very, very useful resource. So I'll read that out again. It is the British Library's Parliamentary Constituencies and Their Registers Since 1832. Oh, sorry, one of my colleagues is messaging me. Nothing to do with this, just something completely different. Um, so yeah, it's actually, if you want to get to that easily, so if you go to the main search page for England and Wales electoral registers 1832 to 1932, you will see the useful links and resources just below the search box. Virtually every individual search page on Find My Past has one of these, and you'll find things like, they include things like on parish collections, you'll get parish lists. On certain other collections, it'll direct you towards closely related resources that have quite a lot of overlap. But on this page, it will take you directly to the British Library's handy guide for constituencies since 1832. So yeah, I guess the next thing to talk about is who is actually recorded and when. But before I do that, I'll have another quick look at the comments because I can see they're coming in thick and fast. Yeah, just seeing people talking about Boston Spa. I was actually doing a little bit of reading about that the other day and about how amazing it is that all the newspapers are kept in a low oxygen, low light environment, and they're retrieved off the shelves by hydraulic arms, whether they're taken by driverless shuttle over to our digitization team who are scanning 24 hours a day. It's an amazing undertaking, and I've never actually been to Boston Spa. It's on my list of things. Uh, let's just have a look. Oh, brilliant! Thanks, Zoe, for confirming the stream's working. Yeah, I think everyone's internet's just behaving a bit. We're all very, very busy. Yes, I love House Through Time too. Actually, I'll go. Ah, brilliant! Thank you, Elsa. Yeah, it can also be downloaded. The British Library Guide can also be downloaded as a PDF. And a book is also at the Society of Genealogists Library, which is another place you should visit if you're ever in East London. Not that far from the Find My Past office, and an absolute treasure trove. Um, and you can also go and say hi to lovely folks such as Elsa. Right. So who could vote and when? Yes. So yeah, as I said, it really does. I find this quite exciting, but it does capture the birth of the British electorate. 1832, introduction of the Great Reform Act, covers all the major milestones of expansion of the electorate. Some of the, I'm repeating myself now, but I just want to hammer it home. Really, some of the most important events in the history of British democracy, if you kind of discount the execution of Charles I, the Civil War, Magna Carta. But yeah, these are definitely some of the most important recent events in British democracy history. So the kind of things you'll get in there, you'll find the very, very first voters enfranchised by the Great Reform Act. You'll find the very first working class voters to get the vote in 1867 when they issued the first Representation of the People Act. You'll find the very, very first female voters in British history as well, along with many very notable suffragettes who, of course, submitted their vote when they were finally given it in 1918 following the Representation of the People Act. And there's so much more than that. It's just so fascinating to see. And what I was doing before, which was also quite fun, was doing, because you can do a blank search with any of our record sets, blank searching by year, and blank searching around the times of these big milestones and seeing how insane the num the increase in the number of voters was. Actually, that's just given me an idea. We need to do a chart on this. I think that would be quite a cool thing, wouldn't it? If you could actually see by political milestone how much the number of voters jumped. Of course, it's an important history to commemorate. I think we take for granted that for the vast, vast, vast majority of history, not very few people actually had the right to decide who was in charge and who was making the rules and who was governing them. Something we take for granted today, and that's why marking anniversaries like the 2018 anniversary of the Representation of the People Act, remembering all the incredible work the suffragettes did and the fighting the good fight is important. Democracy still needs to be protected, I think. But anyway, I'm going to go through some of the major milestones. So if you are watching in the US and you didn't have to do GCSEs or O levels or whatever they were called, if you didn't pass through the English school system, you might be scratching your head at my mentions of the Representation of the People Act 1832 or the Great Reform Act. What is it? Well, in 1832, they introduced the wrong word. They standardized the borough franchise and simplified it significantly. Because prior to this, voting rights and constituencies and franchises were very, very complicated. And they were complicated for a reason. So you had these things called rotten boroughs. So, for example, I think there was one called Salop. I think it might have been in Shropshire or something like that. And they had or I think they had a population of like 6, and they sent more MPs to Parliament than the entirety of Manchester, which had a vast, vast population, because these antiquated old rotten boroughs, as they were called. Uh, Sorry, just looking at more messages. But so the 1832 Act, what it basically did was it extended the vote to any £10 householder who occupied a property. Basically, this was anybody who was an owner or a tenant of a property worth at least £10 a year. And if they were a lodger, as long as the property of the value they occupied divided by the total number of lodgers exceeded £10 a year, then they were given the vote. So, I mean, it sounds quite dry and complicated, but this had a really significant impact. It increased the voting pool hugely, and pretty much in all cases, the actually no, that's not really relevant. But I'll simplify it. So in English counties, anybody who was a 40 shilling freeholder, who was previously qualified to vote, was now joined by these £10 freeholders. So I think, I'm sure, how many people did it add? It added loads. It basically it extended the vote to certain mortgage holders. The clergy, surprisingly, members of the clergy couldn't vote before this. Irremovable schoolmasters, parish clerks, sextons, all these people who couldn't vote before, but it was still not everybody. That was it. Old Sarum that I was talking before, which wasn't in Shropshire, it was in Salisbury. They had only 7 voters, but they had 2 MPs, whereas Manchester sent less and they had millions more people. The next big milestone was the Representation of the People Act in 1867. That was another big one. That basically brought the franchise, right to vote, whatever you want to call it, to all householders subject to a 1-year residential qualification and the payment of rates. Rate paying records are another resource that you'll come across in your family in your research quite a lot, particularly when you get further along. They're basically local tax records. And it also extended the county franchise to people who were occupying land worth £12 or more a year, or own land that was worth more than £5. So you can see it's just broadening out again. So this had the main effect this had was basically giving representation to industrial centres and decreased the representation that was held by these smaller towns, rotten boroughs. Women and poor men were still denied the right to vote, so there was still a long way to go in parliamentary elections. But it basically, this 1867 Act doubled the electorate in England and Wales. So see what I was saying about it rapidly expanding? We do need to do a chart on this. It doubled the electorate in England and Wales from 1 million to 2 million. But there were still 30 million people living in Britain at the time. So as recently as 1867, I'm not very good at maths. I was trying to work the percentage out at the top of my head, but let's just leave the numbers. 30 million people in Britain, only 2 million could vote. Prior to that, out of 30 million, only 1 million could vote. Crazy. Then you had another one in 1872, which was called the Secret Ballot Act, and this was when elections started to resemble a bit more the experiences we have today when we go into a polling booth. Because basically, what this did was it basically meant that parliamentary and local elections had to be held by a secret ballot. Prior to this, voters could have been bribed or intimidated. You know, if you're on your way to the polling booth and the Lord of the Manor, who you kind of owed your livelihood and existence to, was there shaking his fist at you, telling you better not vote for this guy, you probably weren't going to do it. And as a result, elections still weren't fair. The gentry still wielded disproportionate power over people that lived on their land. So when after this act was passed, basically a landlords or employers were not allowed to be present during the voting process. They weren't allowed to check individual votes. It's crazy to think they could beforehand. That was common practice, that they could check individual votes. And they built on this again in 1833. They added another act called the Corrupt and Illegal Practices Act, which passed even more measures to basically stop bribery and make things a bit more above board. Then in 1884, you had the another Reform Act, the Reform Act of 1884, and this basically extended the 1867-68 householder and lodger franchises to occupant. It basically gave occupants the right to vote as well. So if they were an occupant of land, again worth £12 a year, a tenant, these guys could vote too as well. This was kind of the start of the vote being gradually extended across the male working class population, but not all of them. Still not all of them. The big one we all know was 1918. This was the first time that all working class men over the age of 21 and any woman over the age of 30 was entitled to be registered, was entitled to vote. I mean, this is obviously a huge milestone in our history. But one of the reasons it's mainly remembered for is the fact that it gave women the right to vote. But what people don't realise was prior to the 1918 Act, most working class men couldn't vote either, which is I wasn't quite aware of that until I was looking at when the anniversary happened back in 2018. I was like, whoa, I assumed working class men could vote by then, but no, they couldn't. So this was huge, 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 huge. It completely transformed the electorate. You had, as I said, working class men, women over the age of 30, and the restrictions tied to property ownership were largely done away with. Um, some men under the age of 21 were able to vote. Men over the age of 19 who were serving in the armed forces were given the right to vote. You can understand why they did that. You know, the First World War had been raging for 4 years by this point, and it seems it's awful really to think, isn't it, that the vast majority of the guys sat in the trenches didn't have the power to decide which direction the country was headed. They had no say. And I think the government realised that if they were going to ask, you know, British men to die in their millions, these men should probably have a say in which wars were fought and why they were fought. Um, this didn't double the electorate; it tripled it. So the electorate went from 7.7 million to 21.4 million. And the other big impact was now women accounted for 43% of the electorate. And then last but not least, you have the 1928 Act, which was the Equal Franchise Act. And this basically expanded the law. It gave all women over the age of 21, regardless of property ownership, the right to vote. And it was passed by the Conservative Party and became law on the 2nd of July 1928. Well, I hope you're not bored. I can still see there are a few people watching, so so it can't have been too boring. But yeah, that was my very, very jumbled guide to the history of British democracy and why electoral registers are amazing. Anya said the paper I was reading, I was something about coal mining. I'm not quite in Salop. That's why I'm getting confused. Thank you, Colin. Colin correct. Salop is the old name for Shropshire. That's fine. My grandmother was from Shropshire. Both my grandparents were from Shropshire. She'd be turning in her grave if she knew I got that wrong. Um, Yeah, Denise. Ooh, rotten boroughs about the only thing I remember from that period of history. Makes sense at last. Yeah, when I was going through this, I was getting flashbacks to GCSE English and Mr. Dillon, who was a great history teacher actually. I wonder where he is now. And Linda Salter say, wow, just found my Scots great great grandfather who died in South Africa and gave up trying to find. Has popped up in Edinburgh Evening newspaper obituaries. Mega excited. Wow, I'm gonna have to give that a like if I can, because that is fantastic. Oh, Williams said 6.6%, and I'm not quite sure that was related to. But yes, as Anya said, it makes you realise how very important it is to vote. At Barbara saying, couldn't see any Suffolk ERs. As I said, these aren't quite finished yet. We're going to continue to add to them over time. This is just the biggest batch we've added since the first lot we did in 2015. So just keep an eye out on our regular updates. This goes for everybody. If you want to keep an eye on what we release every single week, go to the What's New section of our blog. It'll take you very nicely and neatly straight to the individual collections we're talking about. Tricia said, how much of the London electoral rolls were destroyed during World War II, please? I'm not sure if they were. I might be completely wrong here, but I know that the archive fires were mainly National Archive things held by the National Archives. I'm not aware of any significant damage or loss of British Library holdings during the war, but I may be completely wrong. Do correct me if you're screaming if you're screaming at your screen. Uh, Patty Marie said, fascinating history. We do take voting for granted. Happy to have found my great great aunt in the 19th electoral age. Brilliant. That's what I like to see. Making pacts, helping people find ancestors. Um, Denise has said, we'll be looking for my great grandmother. She was very politically aware, so maybe. And actually, Denise, thank you for popping that because you've just reminded me of something. As well as house history, as well as the history of the British electorate, you can also use these to explore the history of political movements. If you're looking in specific election years, it's probably worth having a look at what was going on in the newspapers as well, the newspaper coverage as well. That can give you it's a great context builder. Sorry, I've left my curtains open and now I'm being blinded by the light. To turn my laptop a bit. Oh my rather unsightly beard is getting too illuminated. I don't like that. Yeah, so yeah, compare them to newspapers, set the scene, understand the context, have give yourself an idea of who your ancestors might have voted for, who was running for office, what they were standing for. I think it really helps you get into all this and realize your ancestors as real people. Sylvia said, "I have a theory that the secret ballot." Oh, well, I do like your theory, Sylvia. I have a theory that the secret ballot enabled anti-vaccinators to elect members to the board of guardians who were sympathetic to their cause, as in the Keithley in the 1870s, when eventually 7 members of the board of guardians were imprisoned. Wow, God, I'm gonna have to get you to do a video for us at some point, Sylvia, because I would love for you to be. I personally would love to hear more about all the kind of research you do, and I'm sure people would love to as well. Um, Zoe saying, looking forward to more Monmouth Shewell records. Well, I hope some more. I hope some more are on the way. I'll have to have a little look. And yeah, so that was my. Oh, very quickly before I go, I do like to talk about anniversaries, don't I? And as I was talking about newspapers, something very very interesting happened. About how many years ago was it? I have actually forgotten the exact anniversary. It was, let me try and work it out in my head. 1895. It's 2020 now. Oh, that's an easy one. 125th. 125th. The 6th of March is the 125th anniversary of one of someone whose works I'm very fond of Oscar Wilde being arrested at the Cadogan Hotel after losing his libel case against the Marquis of Queensberry. The trial of the century, as it was back then, and this is covered very, 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 very extensively in our collection of British newspapers. If you're interested in the life of Oscar Wilde, like I am, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of literature. Did it as my degree. Love all things books. Um, and Oscar Wilde probably is one of the most brilliant minds. Well, I was going to say this country. He's Irish. One of the most brilliant minds Western literature has probably ever produced, I think. Obviously, his poems are brilliant. Salome, that's a bit of a classic, but I think the one everyone knows him for is The Picture of Dorian Gray. But anyway, 125 years ago on what date is the 6th? 125 years ago on Monday, he was locked up after losing his libel case, and you can actually find him in our collection of uh, England and Wales crime, prisons, and punishment records. And it's fascinating as well because it just shows how times have changed. The criminalisation of homosexuality seems quite bizarre to our modern ears, but it was just a accepted part of society and life. And if you look him up, so you've got him by his full name, brilliant name, Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty, Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde. His occupation is listed as author. His address is oh no, that's the committing magistrate. It shows that the warrant to arrest him was issued on the 19th of April 1895, which is quite strange because he was actually received into custody on the 6th of April. But what was he? What do the records say he was in prison for? So it was conspiring and agreeing together to commit and procure to be committed certain acts of gross indecency. Wilde committing acts of gross indecency with Edward Shelley, Alfred Wood, and Charles Parker Taylor, attempting to commit, the word is blanked out, but I think you can guess what that is, with William Parker. Really fascinating period, little chat episode in history, and quite a momentous event in the kind of fight for equality, from LGBT communities, or whatever you want to call them. So he was actually found not guilty. But if you want to learn more about this fascinating trial, there's so much in it in our newspapers. There's actually some great illustrations as well in the likes of the Illustrated London News and Illustrated Police News. But very quickly, what happened? So amid this absolute frenzy of newspaper coverage, Oscar Wilde, the libel case against the Marquis of Queensberry opened on the 3rd of April 1895 at the Central Criminal Court of England and Wales, which is, you may recognise as the Old Bailey. And the trial went pretty badly for Wilde, hence his subsequent arrest. The main problem was that the allegations Queensberry had made about Oscar Wilde's homosexuality were undeniably true, and therefore couldn't be judged as defamatory in the eyes of the law. So during the trial, Queensberry actually presented quite a lot of evidence against Wilde. He accused him of soliciting 12 other young men to commit, as you know, in the records deemed as gross acts of indecency. That's how it was viewed back then. And and as a result, his literary works were brought out. They read extracts of his controversial novel, Picture of Dorian Gray, to provide evidence of his, the homoerotic themes, and they said this was one of his methods of trying to seduce the young Lord Alfred, which obviously probably wasn't true. He wrote it because it was an amazing story and a great book, and he was a genius. But in the novel, an older artist is attracted to the beauty of a younger man whose portrait he paints, and this was all used against Wilde. So across the 3 days of court proceedings, eventually Wilde's lawyer saw which way this was heading and thought, oh, this isn't going our way, and this actually might be spiraling out of all of our control. And they actually drew the lawsuit, which again, in hindsight, was a mistake, because the authorities saw this as a sign of implicit guilt, and that is when they issued the warrant for Wilde's arrest. And he was arrested under a very archaic piece of British legal history called Britain's Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, which basically formally criminalised all sexual acts between men as gross indecency. And what's interesting is sexual acts between women were never made illegal in England, whereas those of men were. And yeah, trial took a real toll on him. Friends urged Wilde to flee to France, but he was a man of principle and had a very firm belief that he was in the right, and didn't want to flee, and then was tried for homosexuality on April 26th, 1895, pleaded not guilty on 25 counts that they set against him, and they brought in all sorts of dodgy witnesses. They brought in people who claimed to be hotel chambermaids who had allegedly seen him. Wilde was questioned extensively about, the famous quote, "The love that dare not speak its name," which is a phrase from Alfred Douglas's poem, "The Two Loves." And it did end with the jury not actually being able to reach a verdict. But the authorities were determined to get Wilde, and 3 weeks later he was retried. And sadly, this time he was actually convicted and received 2 years hard labour, which was the maximum sentence that was allowed for that crime. Which shows how they were out to get him. He was a well-known figure. He had a degree of power in the sense that he had an audience and people respected his works. And yeah, poor guy was sent to Pentonville, where he spent the first several months of his sentence, put to work picking oakum, which is something that many prisoners had to do. It was a substance that was used to shield gaps in shipbuilding, and it wasn't fun. Prisoners basically had to spend hours and hours and hours untwisting and teasing apart recycled ropes. to get the fibres that were needed to make the oakum, and it was awful in your hands and your back, and it wasn't a nice experience. But eventually he was transferred to London's Reading Gaol, and he remained there until his release in 1897. But the real sad thing is that Wilde's health suffered very badly in history, and after his release, he spent the last 3 years living in exile in France. Where he actually composed his last work, which was actually about his time in Reading prison. It's called The Ballad of Reading Gaol, or the Ballad of Reading Jail, whatever you want to call it. And it's about an execution that took place while he was in prison there. Yeah, so tragic end to the life of a very brilliant man. He sadly passed away at the age of just 46 on November the 3rd, 1900, and was buried in Paris, where I think he felt he'd been treated more kindly than he had done in Britain. But yeah, I really can't see. So I think I'm going to take a quick look at the comments. Yeah, people are starting to peel off now anyway. So yeah, we'll leave it at that for now. Um, yeah, that's a great comment from on you actually. Interesting that Winston Churchill was very highly respected across the UK, but when he was MP in Dundee, he wasn't really that. I think that's an understatement. I think they hate him. I think they have quite good reason. Daphne Hannon, yes, we do have bite-sized videos for beginners. We've got many videos on all different topics on our YouTube page, so do check those out. There's loads on there, many to keep you busy, especially while we've all got more time on our hands. Anya just saying how much she loves Oscar Wilde. We have so much in common. I love him too. Elsa dropping more pearls of wisdom, saying, remember these copies held by the BL, which were kept safely. Local copies in town halls may well have suffered damage. Good point about damage, but there were duplicate sets. One of the great things about the British Library, keeping all these duplicates. Thank you very much. Ricky, don't worry, cutting the lawn and washing the car, very important jobs. You do need to take the opportunity to get out. Yeah, I have seen it. Yeah, when I did go over to Dublin, I was, as you're saying, Wild Statue in Dublin is one to see. It was a little pilgrimage I made. Being with my love of literature, I had to pay my respects. I also did to Joyce as well. I went to the pub that James Joyce used to drink in and had a swift one in there. Um, but anyway, yeah. Sorry to all those who've tuned in a little late. Oh, sorry, I could hear my wife laughing in the other room. I'm not sure what's tickled her. I hope it's not this. She does watch these sometimes, actually, but never comments. But yes, we're going to be doing these at 4 p.m. from now on. This is the new time, at least while there are government updates being put out on UK TV every day at 5. And don't forget, every Tuesday, every Thursday, we're hosting more live events. Do tune in. Let's all stay in touch. Let's stay talking to each other. This is always the highlight of my week, and this is the most social contact I've probably had outside of meetings. So thank you all for helping me stay sane. Brilliant. Take it easy, guys. Stay safe. Keep in touch. Let's keep each other going, and I will see you again soon. Thank you so much, guys. Have wonderful weekends. And I hope you don't find the beautiful weather we're set to get in the UK on Sunday too torturous. Um, yeah, let's do some research. That'll keep us busy. Anyway, I'll leave you to it. Bye, guys. I really trying to close this one. I can't see the screen. Right. Stay safe. See you guys.